Hi folks, Adam B. Levine here. We're back from New York with talks, panels, and exclusive interviews to share with you over the next few weeks. One of the most educational panels for me personally was the Bitcoin and Freedom of Speech panel, moderated by a friend of the show, Mark Hochstein. Panelists include Trevor Timms of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, Jonathan Mohan of Bitcoin NYC, Stephanie Murphy of Let's Talk Bitcoin, Alan Safahi of ZipZap, and Michael Turpin of BitAngels. Our release schedule for the next few weeks might be a little more crowded than normal, so stay tuned for episode 30 to release sometime before Friday. If you have comments, questions, or topics for the show, please visit letstalkbitcoin.com/Reddit to be directed to our new listener interaction subreddit. We've had a lot of activity here so far, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say. If you enjoy the content from the conference that'll be releasing over the next few weeks, please donate Bitcoins or Litecoins at letstalkbitcoin.com. This trip was out of pocket, and your support allows us to cover future conferences in the same fashion. We have 3 or 4 more scheduled before the end of the year. Also, thanks to Media Bistro for putting on such a great event with Inside Bitcoins. I'll hand the panel off to Stuart at this point. He's the event's master of ceremonies. Enjoy the show.
This panel is a powerhouse panel. We're really thrilled that all of these personalities were able to be assembled, and one of the reasons they're here is because Mark Hochstein, who's the executive editor with American Banker, was kind enough to help me invite everybody and to initiate a lot of these contacts. So Mark really helped me with this event from the beginning, and I really appreciate it. I want to give him a big round of applause. He's going to introduce the panelists.
Thanks, Stuart. It's very fitting that this event is organized by Media Bistro. Years ago, in the late 90s, I went to a media mixer cocktail party for journalists and people like that that was organized by Media Bistro. And I met the publisher of High Times magazine. And I told him that I worked at a banking publication. And he said, well, you should write an article for me about how to launder money. And I was on the mortgage beat at the time, so I demurred. But I did, I asked him, what's the office environment like at your magazine? He said, it's pretty much what you'd expect. So, on a serious note, one of the things that gets overlooked, I think, when people talk about Bitcoin in the mainstream media is the positive aspects of its neutrality. People say it's used to launder money, it's used to buy drugs, potential for use by terrorists and whatnot. But there is a flip side to that. And I'm just going to briefly read a quote here. This is from Bitcoin Magazine, which is out in the exhibition area. They're selling these. This is from when WordPress started accepting Bitcoin. They said, this is how WordPress explained it. They said why they accepted Bitcoin to sell their add-ons. PayPal alone blocks access from over 60 countries. Many credit card companies have similar restrictions. Some are blocked for political reasons. Whatever the reason, we don't think an individual blogger from Haiti, Ethiopia, or Kenya should have diminished access to the blogosphere because of payment issues they can't control. Our goal is to enable people, not block them. And then this was an additional commentary from the article, regards anonymity. Many bloggers that operate in restrictive regimes do so using pseudonyms for their own protection. Traditional payment methods like credit cards and PayPal are unusable for those bloggers because they expose the payer's physical identity. And I think that's a really sort of fitting introduction to a discussion about this aspect of Bitcoin. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to briefly introduce yourselves and explain what you do and how that ties into this subject of Bitcoin and free speech. We'll start from to my left, Trevor.
Hi, everybody. My name's Trevor Timm. I'm the executive director of the Freedom of the Press Foundation. I also work for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, which is a digital civil liberties organization in San Francisco. And I'm here to talk about both jobs of mine because they both kind of deal both directly and indirectly with WikiLeaks and Bitcoin and free expression. EFF was one of the first organizations to take Bitcoin back in 2010. They subsequently decided to stop taking it, and then recently in the last month or so, we started taking it again. And I'm going to probably get into the reasons why. We've received a lot of criticism, but there was actually very good reasons, and mostly to actually protect Bitcoin and make sure that the markets stayed as sound as they were. For Freedom of the Press Foundation, we started about 6 or 8 months ago, and our goal is to facilitate and crowdfund donations to a variety of transparency journalism organizations, the most notable being WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, as probably many of you know, was cut off from Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal back in the end of 2010. They started publishing classified State Department cables, same State Department cables the New York Times and other newspapers were publishing. But because of pressure, unofficial pressure from a couple congressmen, all of these payment processors decided to cut WikiLeaks off, even though they actually had broken no crime and were protected by the First Amendment, just like the New York Times was. And so we set up an organization to both help other journalism organizations if this ever happened to them, and then also take donations to WikiLeaks. And a big way that WikiLeaks was able to sustain itself during this 2-year period where they couldn't take donations was through Bitcoin. And we also decided to take Bitcoin just after our launch, and we can get into that later in the panel, but I'll pass it along.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Mohan, and I founded, thank you, and I founded Bitcoin NYC. In the past 5 months, we've grown to be the largest and most active Bitcoin-related community in the world, and my perspective here is kind of on the ground of what it is means to adopt Bitcoin, and as it relates to free speech, I'm trying to proselytize Bitcoin as much as possible, so I kind of bring that angle to the discussion.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Murphy, and I am a radio and podcast host. You may know me from the podcast called Let's Talk Bitcoin. It's a twice-weekly show all about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, which I host with Adam B. Levine, who's over here, and Andreas Antonopoulos. And obviously I'm really interested in Bitcoin. I got interested in it back in 2011, so I guess I was fairly early in on the curve. And the way I heard about Bitcoin initially was from another radio show that I'm also a host of, which is called Free Talk Live. And that's a nationally syndicated talk radio show with an individual liberty bent. And I am someone who has, for a very long time, had a really strong interest in human freedom of all different kinds. It extends to a lot of different areas of interests of mine. And so I've been following things like WikiLeaks and anything that has to do with Bitcoin, freedom of speech, and potentially sort of these organizations that this talk may be really relevant to. So I guess I'm coming at it from more of a journalism angle. And I also have an interest in Bitcoin charities. So these two things sort of dovetail for me. I work with a Bitcoin-based charity called Free Aid. We do outreach and education about health and safety, and we also provide first aid at some sort of rural camping events. And so I've been really interested in how Bitcoins can benefit charitable and nonprofit organizations. So I'll be talking a little bit about that too.
Thank you. Hi, this is Alan Safahi. I'm founder and CEO of ZipZap. ZipZap is a global cash payment network. So we obviously deal with a lot of anonymity issues and KYC and AML issues. But I'm here on the panel today because of my background. I immigrated here from Iran in 1977, before the revolution. So I've lived under oppressive regimes before, and I've gone back to Iran for visits and lived under that oppressive regime after the revolution. So freedom of speech is a very important and dear concept to me. I fight for it. I teach my kids to fight for it and not be bullied. So I believe freedom to spend your money is part of your rights, similar to freedom of speech, is freedom of expression. So if you like what somebody says on their blog and you want to donate money to them, you're expressing your support of that freedom of speech. So it's important for us to fight for that. And I am fighting from inside the regime. For the past 18 years, I have been involved with prepaid Visa, MasterCard products, a company that my son is now running, and since I launched ZipZap. So I've decided to join the fight from within, and I am a freedom fighter. So I look forward to your call.
Hear, hear.
Hi, my name is Michael Turpin. I'm a serial entrepreneur in the media industry. Disrupted business models a few times. I started the first national PR firm based on new media and internet back in the early 1990s. I then started the first internet-based press release distribution company. It was originally called Internet Wire in 1994, funded by Sequoia Capital, and we changed the name when we started working with NASDAQ to MarketWire and sold that in 2006. It's now the third largest news wire in the world for company news and press release distribution, and I'm currently CEO of Social Radius, which is one of the oldest social media marketing firms in the country. It also has a PR division. I got involved in Bitcoin in two ways. I was working with clients for about a decade in the virtual currency space, which, unlike digital currency, virtual currency is kind of just like a currency, and it operates inside a video game, Second Life, and we worked with a number of companies such as Entropia Universe, which you could actually take money out of the video game and spend it. And that was sort of the predecessor to a lot of the freedom of currency issues that are coming up now. When I first went to the Bitcoin conference in San Jose, gosh, only 2 months ago, I was struck by the fact that it was in the same small room as the first Internet World, also run by Alan Meckler, who owns Media Bistro. And about the same size, and they had little 10 by 10 tables in 1994 for these little startup companies called Yahoo and Lycos. And here you had Coinbase, and so I just got this idea that this was sort of the biggest thing we've seen since social media 10 years ago and the internet 20 years ago, and that I needed to be there. And I then met David Johnston at the cocktail party, and we had a conversation that there needed to be an angel group because there was a gap between the crowdfunding of some of these new startups, and when they finally started just minting money and growing at 15% a week, and would get $5 million checks from Union Square and some of these other top VCs. And so David said, "Why don't we start one?" And so we did. So we co-founded a group called Bit Angels. We're actually going to be having a meeting at lunch. We grew from the two of us to now 200 angels, and we funded one deal, and we're getting ready to announce 3 more that we're in the process of closing. And I'm also on the board of the Newhouse School of Journalism at Syracuse University, which is one of the premier journalism schools in the world, and we're very focused on First Amendment rights. And at first, when I was asked about this panel, I was thinking, well, currency and freedom of speech aren't exactly the same thing. And then, of course, I rebrowsed the decision of Citizens United, which basically says they are.
Which actually brings us to the first question I want to throw out to the panel. Are financial transactions speech? Trevor.
Well, I would argue they are, no matter your feelings on Citizens United, and I'll just give the prime example, which I've been working on for 6 months, which I just mentioned, which is WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks was able to publish these classified documents in the public interest, just like newspapers do all the time. The Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. If you open these papers up at any day, you're bound to find classified information on its front pages. But because the United States government could not go to court to censor WikiLeaks officially, there was a decision back in the 70s about the Pentagon Papers. The New York Times published a top-secret study about Vietnam, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that, effectively, that the government cannot censor newspapers. They can only potentially punish them afterwards, which has never happened, and people arguably say that's protected by the First Amendment as well. But so if the government decided to go to court to stop WikiLeaks, they probably would have been laughed out of there by a judge. There's been a long history in this country that no prior restraints or censorship orders are allowed. And so they went a different route. They decided that because of the way the internet works, where all these intermediaries really hold an extraordinary amount of power over what you publish online, that they would target those intermediaries unofficially. So Senator Joe Lieberman and Congressman Peter King approached these companies privately and also publicly asked them to stop servicing WikiLeaks. And
Trevor, this was an extra legal pressure. This was
Right,
not
right.
even
This
through
was
the not even
not-
through the legislative process.
Right. If it was through the legislative process, it would have been struck down immediately. If it was in front of a judge, they would have been laughed out of court. But instead, they decided to do it with a wink and a nod. And so Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal amounted for 95% of all the donations WikiLeaks could take. And so naturally, they were pretty much shut off from any source of funding. And at this point, they were incurring huge costs, given that the U.S. started an investigation into them, despite being protected by the First Amendment. They were getting DDoSed attacked, and their website was going down, and they had huge amounts of server costs because obviously everyone in the world was going to their website to read this news. And we felt that this was a real injustice, and the U.S. government couldn't censor them legally, but they could strangle them financially and hope that eventually they just bled out essentially and couldn't continue. That actually largely worked. WikiLeaks was kind of thrown offline for a while. Their staff was greatly reduced. And so eventually we decided to start the Freedom of the Press Foundation, which, on our board consists of Daniel Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers leaker, Glenn Greenwald, and Laura Poitras, who are, and if you've been paying attention to the NSA stories and Edward Snowden, they were the journalists that leaked those stories. The actor and activist John Cusack is also on our board, and J.P. Barlow, also a founder of EFF. And our goal was to take donations to WikiLeaks so that this unjust act, wouldn't go unpunished, essentially, but also to make sure that we could be there if this ever happened again. Obviously, in the next few years, there's going to be many websites that have a digital-only publication model, and that many who might be like WikiLeaks, who take anonymous submissions from whistleblowers. And if the government decided that this was a tactic that they would use again, that we would be there to step in and say, okay, we'll take donations, you can donate to us, and we can provide a certain level of anonymity. And this is kind of where Bitcoin comes in. Luckily, WikiLeaks had been able to take Bitcoin donations for these 2 years, and it kept them afloat at least, so they could survive at least with bare bones costs. And so naturally, when we started our website, and we got all sorts of complaints that we weren't taking Bitcoin. We probably got the amount of comments we got about Bitcoin versus all the other comments combined were probably about equal. Like, people just really wanted to use this service to donate to something that they felt that they should be able to do anonymously. And so right after we started, we pretty much heard these calls and decided to start taking Bitcoin donations as well. And it just gives people another way to donate to a group that, again, it's not illegal to donate to, but it may look politically bad on their part, or they might be worried that they may end up on a government watch list or part of some investigation that may be frivolous, but again, they just don't want their name attached to it. So in that sense, it's been very successful and could have huge implications for free speech down the road.
There's one question, Trevor. Can you share how you get the money, whether it comes in from Bitcoin or dollars, how do you get the money from the foundation to WikiLeaks?
Sure. So again, it's not illegal to donate to WikiLeaks. There's actually a variety of methods that people have been able to do so. In the past 2 years, it's just much harder. Everybody uses a credit card, everybody uses PayPal, and it takes 30 seconds. But you can still, for example, bank wire money to WikiLeaks. You can send them a check. You can use a service that not everybody knows about, but still exists, called Flatter. And of course, Bitcoin. So the only problem, this financial blockade wasn't a legal restriction preventing people from actually doing it. It was just making it much harder. And so we wanted to bring the ease back into donating to WikiLeaks, given that how many people wanted to, but just either couldn't figure it out or it made them extra nervous.
More than 300,000 users and counting trust blockchain.info. It's a Bitcoin wallet service and a wealth of Bitcoin information, and it's completely free to use. With a blockchain.info wallet, you'll get the convenience of a web wallet and the security of a desktop client. Blockchain.info is also a block explorer. You can use it to see Bitcoin transactions in real time, check the balance of any Bitcoin address, and view many handy Bitcoin charts, all for free. See what they have to offer today at blockchain.info.
Hi, this is Jason King, founder at Sean's Outpost, and you are listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin. Sean's Outpost is a homeless outreach in Pensacola, Florida, and we are proudly powered by Bitcoin. To date, over 13,000 meals have been fed to the homeless in our area, all purchased with Bitcoin and through the generosity of the cryptocurrency community. Read more about us at seansoutpost.com. Food, shelter, Bitcoin, everybody. Sean'sOutpost.com.
Stephanie, for organizations that are outside the political mainstream, how important is it when they're taking donations to offer the option of anonymity?
Oh, I think it's incredibly important if they're going to succeed. The example that just came to mind when you were talking, Trevor, was there's an organization called antiwar.com, and they've had basically a website that gives editorial news and views from an anti-war perspective for about 17 years. And they recently, got interested in Bitcoin, but, they'd been around for a while and been accepting donations, and they had, a pool of donors. And recently, just a couple of months ago, they found out that they had their management, their leadership, had been being surveilled by the FBI for a couple of years. And the FBI had been failing to respond to FOIA requests for information about that. And a couple of their big donors heard about that and got really spooked and, didn't want to donate because they didn't want their names attached to supporting an organization like antiwar.com. And, you wouldn't think that would be so controversial, but apparently it is. So it's absolutely important to have the option for anonymity, because some people do want to donate, but they don't want their name attached to it. And actually, funny enough, you'd be surprised. I've met a lot of people in the Bitcoin space and asked them, I like to ask them, how did they get interested in Bitcoin at first? And there have been a lot of people who have told me that the reason they got into Bitcoin was because they wanted to donate to WikiLeaks, and they couldn't do it through the legacy banking system or through their credit card or whatever. And but they didn't want that to be like public information. They were almost scared to say, well, I want to give Bitcoin to WikiLeaks. So I think there's a large pool of people out there who would donate to certain organizations if they could do so anonymously and be assured of that. And Trevor, like you were saying, there's this climate of fear now because the government can extra legally kind of strangle somebody financially, and the system that we have has built in so much financial control over potentially anybody that it is really important to have that option to donate anonymously. And Mark, when you said is financial action speech or our financial transaction speech, it's funny because the word speech kind of connotes like free speech, like the right to free speech that's enshrined in the Constitution. And I have a slightly different perspective on that. I don't think it really matters what's in the Constitution because freedom of expression is a human right? And so even if financial transactions are speech, then it shouldn't matter what the Constitution says. And we all know that they don't follow it anyway. Trevor, as you said, the whole pressure on WikiLeaks was completely extra legal. So we're almost at a point now where it doesn't really matter, or it matters less and less every day that we have a First Amendment. And maybe we ought to start looking at speech and expression in many different forms, including financial transactions, as just sort of a human right.
When we're speaking about organizations that are outside of the political mainstream, I think one example that's not talked about so much because of how outside of the mainstream it is Defense Distributed. And this is the organization that wants to take 3D printed blueprints of guns and distribute them to the masses to give the right to bear arms to anyone who has a 3D printer. And if you're talking about people who don't want to have their name on a registry, they have virtually no donations in fiat, just because, you know, I would fear giving them money. But if you look at where they receive their funding from, they've had over $50,000 in donations through Bitcoin. And Cody Wilson, who's the gentleman who runs this, would say that he would go to events such as this and he would speak, and he'd get maybe a couple of dollars handed to him in person, and then he'd go home the next day and see thousands of dollars in Bitcoins given to his organization to help him run it. So you really, it's a clear-cut example of something that's almost entirely funded through Bitcoin, just because of the toxic financial system of people fearing for being put on a list for something as, you know, politically explosive as, you know, the right to bear arms.
Or literally explosive in this case. And, I mean, we're kind of getting to like the real sort of edge of, you know, what a lot of people would sort of be comfortable with. I mean, you know, if financial transactions are speech, does that mean that if someone like actually does wire money to a terrorist organization, is that an act of speech? Anyone want to tackle that?
Well, even the traditional definition of freedom of speech has the historic limits on it, like you don't have freedom of speech to yell fire in a crowded theater if there's not a fire. And I think that, you know, it's interesting with Citizens United, the Supreme Court case that basically said, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, in 2010, that independent organizations could take unlimited donations on behalf of a candidate or a cause, because otherwise they would be restrained in their free speech. And so that really opened up the door for a lot of other interpretations of what the corollary between free speech and free right of spending. And then there has to be a corollary drawn, a corollary drawn of type of currency. In other words, if you're or type of barter, right? I mean, because the U.S. doesn't recognize bitcoins as a currency, most places don't. I mean, can you donate fine art? Can you donate rare coins? Can you donate something else or spend them? And, you know, with regard to Citizens United, there's a new case that's coming before the Supreme Court from a gentleman in Alabama who wants to be able to donate unlimited amounts directly to the candidate. And that was settled
not through
in
a super PAC, but directly.
Directly, yeah. And that was settled in 1967. And he said, well, that was before Citizens United, so everything's changed now. And there's a very good chance that that will be overturned, which means that, you know, these $50,000 plate dinners could become $500,000 plate dinners, and anybody who wants to sort of influence election at any level, it'll be even easier. Even though in the states where they've actually tried to put campaign limits on, it's been proven that there's a much bigger diversity of candidates, and when you have unlimited rights to spend, you basically get rid of diversity. So these are all related rights, even though there are limits on it, just like there would be limits on within currency, you know, doing illegal activities within currency. The question is, how do you temper the freedom of speech with the freedom of a government to be able to, you know, stop crimes and things like that? You certainly, in most non-totalitarian states, you can't go 100%. You can stop all crime if you basically frisk everybody in the morning and in the evening and then follow them all day long. That's 100% compliance. 0% compliance is we're not even looking if you're killing someone in front of us. Obviously, the medium is what a society decides is in between.
Alan, on that spectrum that Michael just laid out of 100% compliance and 0% compliance, having come from a country that had a true authoritarian regime, what's your sense of like where the U.S. is on that scale?
Well, the country was built on separation of church and state. I think we should also add separation of bank and state. You know, I mean, right now we have... I don't know where in Constitution it says that the government is there to protect me from myself. For example, there are so many examples. Trevor talked about WikiLeaks. That's one example. What happened with Snowden is another example. Look at, even outside of this, look at online gambling. I talked to people, general manager of one of the largest casinos, and they pushed hard. They lobbied to get gambling made illegal because they wanted to catch up. They were losing market share to people from the UK and other places that came to US. So I'm worried about letting government go so far as trying to control where we spend our money. and by the stranglehold they have on the financial services, then where do you stop after that? So I would say, ironically, in Iran, they have more freedom of expression. You can talk about the government, you can say bad things about the mullahs, but you can actually spend your money wherever you want. They're not tracking it the way they do it here. So you could argue that they have more freedom of expression in Iran than they do here. Okay, I'm not advocating to change the regime here or anything like that, heaven forbid. But what I really would like us to do is to not jump so quickly when something happens like 9/11, and all of a sudden the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, let's create, a Patriot Act. Okay, how many of you guys really feel safer because of Patriot Act?
Show of hands.
Anybody? I mean, I ask people in the government, I ask people in the banking, in law enforcement, it's created so much work for them that they're not spending their time really going after crooks and criminals. The same thing's happening at the airports. They spend so much time searching you when you go through the line, that they're not spending time really looking for the terrorist before he becomes a terrorist. Okay, that's what they should be doing. Look at Israel. They have really good examples of that, where 5-mile radius before you get to the airport, they're interviewing you before you even get close to the airport. And they're probably interviewing you before you even leave your home. They know what you're about to do. So I think I want to step back and talk about one more thing. Look at these embargoes and sanctions. None of them work. Okay, people are really resilient. They're very innovative, and they find ways around it. But when they're spending their time finding ways around the sanctions, they're not creating new products. They're not helping each other. So if you take Iran, for example, 60 million population, half of them is less than 30 years old. A lot of people, very highly educated, a lot of value culturally put on education, a lot of good developers there. And they are involved in Bitcoins. They are buying them, but they're doing it in innovative ways that I won't mention here. So I would say if you remove these sanctions and remove these barriers and let people interact with each other, make global trade happen freely, without friction, without cost. It shouldn't cost me $42 to send money to African country. The poorer the country, by the way, the more expensive it is to send money there. Yeah. Okay, why? That's criminal. To me, that's criminal. Let people transact with each other, and what happens is you have billions of people that are now getting money. They're selling their stuff online. They're getting paid in Bitcoin, very little cost. And those people will become your customers in the future. Those people, as they make more money, then they're going to want the same luxuries that we have here. And it goes upstream. It helps all of us. So, yeah, I'm against government interference with financial services.
That sounded. The last line sounded like a bit of a blanket statement. I mean, shouldn't there be some limits? I mean, as an MSB, you've got to do KYC, you've got to do AML. Yeah. Don't those things serve a purpose?
Yeah, I think there is limits. Obviously, nobody wants to see, human trafficking or illegal stuff. Terrorism activities. Nobody wants to see that. But I think we need to take careful steps. My company, ZipZap, I'm here personally, not representing the company, but I can tell you that we do full KYC. We have to do it in order, because at the beginning when we launched, there were so many people that wanted to use our system because it was cash. So we had to do some KYC, but we do it in a different way that we're not going to, your privacy is not, sold on to third parties. You're protected, and so there's some benefits to a KYC we provide for cash versus what maybe credit card companies provide. You don't have the same level of protection. I know one of my employees was slightly overweight and bought a book online from Amazon, and within days she started to getting offers for diet pills and diet programs. I mean, that's the invasion of privacy. So as long as you know that when you buy through ZipZap and we do a full KYC on you, that information is never shared with any third parties. It may give you a little bit of more protection, more comfort zone than. Nothing is as good as cash. I mean, here's another problem. You can go to the store right now, to any grocery store, and buy a $500 Amex gift card or a Visa gift card, and never have to show ID or give them your name or address or anything. And you can go buy hundreds of them and put it in a suitcase and take it across the border anywhere you want, right? But if you go through our system, you have to provide your name and information. Unfortunately, as I said, I'm inside the system, but I'm hoping to educate the banks and educate the government to change that. And one of the things, I don't know if you guys, anybody heard about this new announcement last night, the Digital Asset Transfer Authority data?
That's the new self-regulatory
Anybody saw that? So I'm proud to be a founding member of that. There's 15 of us. We invite everybody to join. Basically, it's a self-regulated organization that we are forming so that we can regulate ourselves so that the government doesn't come and tell us to regulate. And it's been a successful model for a lot of other industries, and we hope to apply it to emerging payments. And if you guys look up hashtag data, DATA, and join us, because we want to really be self-regulated. We want to do the right things. We can never get rid of fraud and those people that do illegal stuff. We can just push them somewhere else. Make it difficult enough that they go somewhere else. Because I tell you guys, the vision for Bitcoin is going to be set in organizations like this, in the conferences like this. I was involved with the web when it first started in the 1990s, when it became commercialized. And I can tell you, if Jeff Bezos and Andreessen and others thought about web the way it was in those days, where it was all porn and gambling, we would have never had an internet. So they had a different vision. They saw where we were going, and they brought us along with them. And I think we need to do the same thing as leaders and trailblazers in this industry. We need to have a vision. Where do we want Bitcoin to go? There's so much good that can come from Bitcoin. Billions of people around the world that can have better economic and better health because they are making money, and they can become consumers, that they can benefit from all of the things that we have here. That's where we should be taking this thing, rather than stomping our feet on the ground and saying we have to have anonymity. I don't think that is, so there's a balance there, and that's the balance that I guess we are going to be debating in this conference.
When you mention invasions of privacy, it reminds me of what the Freedom of the Press released last month. So as it talks about journalists, last month you guys released your white paper that spoke on all the things you could do to protect yourself from the most onerous of agencies, the NSA. So could you talk a little bit about that? Because I just thought that as it relates to journalism, that's a fascinating discussion.
So I'm sure most of you have seen the news in the last month about the NSA and how they've been tracking the phone call records of pretty much every American, whether you have Verizon or AT&T or Sprint or whatever cell phone service. And that oftentimes if you're communicating overseas with anybody, they are also scooping up those communications without a warrant as well. And so we wrote a white paper about encryption and how it can work if used properly. Unfortunately, it's still very hard to use from just an ordinary user perspective, and it takes time to set up, and sometimes it's clunky, and there's quirks to it. But if you can figure it out, it provides a sense of privacy that few services do. And so we tried to write our guide. You can go see it at pressfreedomfoundation.org. We wrote it in the respect that we want whistleblowers and journalists to be able to use it to communicate with their sources, but it basically can be used by anybody. And we tried to write it in as matter-of-fact language as possible so that you didn't have to be a computer expert to understand it. It'll definitely take you a good hour to get through and set up, but hopefully it can provide some way for ordinary people to start communicating more privately in this age where it seems that not only the U.S. government, but governments around the world are increasing their surveillance capabilities when it comes to the internet.
And I would like to mention, I'm really good on action steps. So if anyone would like to know more about that, myself and Jonathan Warren, who's sitting back in the corner, who's the creator of BitMessage, if you guys have heard about it before, we'll be doing workshops on it for journalists. So if you're a blogger or if you're a traditional journalist, please come see me. We're not going to charge for them. We just need a space. And if you wish to volunteer, please do. And we want to just start teaching journalists how to use what the Freedom of the Press Foundation has made, just so that, because source protection is integral to a functioning society. And we would invite all of you to come and just learn how to actually use these things in your daily life.
The interesting thing about BitMessage is that it's using the Bitcoin technology, but it's for a non-financial use.
Right. So the thing about BitMessage and when it comes to alternative currencies is what makes Bitcoin so cool is that it solves the problem of how to have a third-party arbitrator when there's zero trust in a system. So that can be applied to a lot of things that aren't money. And in BitMessage, you're seeing a solution where that's resolved with communication. So it's not money, it's communication, but it's a really powerful tool to discuss with somebody and have not only the conversations hidden, but the metadata that the government decides that they need no legal standing in order to get from you, it hides that as well. So it's a very interesting solution to that problem, how to communicate with privacy.
I want to open up to questions from the audience in just a minute. There's one more thing I wanted to follow up with Trevor. The Manning verdict is coming out today. You mentioned earlier it's not illegal to donate to WikiLeaks. If it is decided that he aided the enemy in this case, will that change? Will it become de facto illegal? Is there a risk of that?
I mean, I certainly don't think so. I mean, if Manning aided the enemy, that means the New York Times aided the enemy as well as WikiLeaks. You know, back when WikiLeaks started publishing all this information, they were sharing it with newspapers around the globe, including the most distinguished paper in this country. They've also, had partnerships along the ways with the Washington Post, McClatchy, The Guardian, all sorts of respected papers. And the thing is that this aiding the enemy charge is very scary when it comes to Bradley Manning, given that it means that, the government's essentially arguing that even though Bradley Manning never had the intent to aid the enemy, it was always his intention to inform the public. And the fact that they can't prove that this information ever harmed the U.S., even though both of those are true and the prosecution admits it, they're saying that just because information was posted on the internet and Al-Qaeda potentially has an internet connection, that he is therefore guilty of a capital crime. And that has huge implications for whether or not you believe Bradley Manning is a whistleblower, whether somebody is giving hundreds of thousands of documents or just talking to a reporter or posting something on Facebook or Twitter. And so these are the types of issues that are going to crop up again and again. And I think both Jonathan and Stephanie mentioned how intermediaries matter even more every day, and that it seems that the First Amendment matters less and less. And this is true because a lot of times the government doesn't have censorship power, but companies have extraordinary power. The law professor Jeffrey Rosen talks about how the chief decision makers at Google and Facebook are actually more powerful than any justice of the Supreme Court because they alone have the power to decide what gets posted on their sites that everybody uses and what doesn't. And the same can be said for these financial intermediaries. And really, that really goes to the heart of why Bitcoin is so important. What's happened to WikiLeaks, has happened to other organizations. There's countless examples of erotic books that have been cut off from PayPal. Just recently, it was reported that VPN providers were starting to get cut off by MasterCard and Visa. And the government has even tried to codify this technique. I'm sure a lot of you remember the Stop Online Piracy Act in 2011, where this act was supposed to stop people from downloading illegal movies and music, but would have censored broad swaths of the internet. The way they were going to do that was by cutting off financial intermediaries, people that took advertising and MasterCard, Visa, and PayPal. So this is an issue that just will keep growing, and hopefully Bitcoin can act as kind of a backstop against that.
I think it's time to take questions from the audience.
I've got a microphone, so just raise your hand and I will come around, bring you the microphone. Anybody have a question? Yep, here we go. Try to get this over here. If maybe you can help me hand it. Oh, I got it.
Hi, thank you. I'm Jacob Eliashoff. I'm really just an interested citizen. I had a question especially about what Michael was saying about how there have to be some limits. So for example, with freedom of speech, with all its history of protection, there was this issue that you shouldn't have the right to stand up in a crowded theater and yell fire. I'm sure there's a lot of people in this room, I'm going to go out on a limb, who think that freedom of expression and freedom of financial transactions is broadly a good thing. But I would love to hear some examples of specific things that you think could be forms of expression that could be enabled by Bitcoin that should not be, and what mechanisms, what techniques could be used to prevent that, because otherwise it will really sully the name of the technology.
So I just want to jump in real quick and I'll let everyone else respond, because that's the second time I've heard this analogy that it's illegal to yell fire in a crowded theater. And I just want to say how terrible that analogy is. It was written back in 1917, and it was in one of the worst cases, First Amendment-wise, in Supreme Court history. Basically, they gave somebody a 10-year jail sentence for writing mild anti-war literature that basically said, stand up for your rights and oppose World War I. And the analogy, which is, just as you can't falsely yell fire in a crowded theater, you can't create pamphlets that criticize the government. And this case was overturned over 40 years ago in another case that dealt with true incitement of violence, which is still illegal. You just have to prove certain steps, whether it's going to be imminent and whether you're directly inciting it. And there's all sorts of protections built into the law that protect citizens from this type of direct incitement of speech, but not necessarily yelling fire in a crowded theater. That's never actually been decided by any sort of court. But of course, there are ways that spending money can be illegal. For example, material support of terrorism. The Supreme Court upheld a decision just a couple years ago talking about how those type of transactions are illegal. And if anybody else wants to jump in.
The slippery slope works both ways. So even though there are things that anonymous use of Bitcoins have in the past enabled, like Silk Road, the internet itself has enabled things, and as you had mentioned, cash. Cash has been used for the vast majority of illegal transactions, and yet we don't go and put scanning devices on every single dollar bill, which we could if we decided that was a priority, and recall all the currency in the United States, put on transmitter chips, and somewhere around the cost of like the Afghanistan war, we could have that. So it's all about the slippery slope going in both directions. Is it most important to make sure we have a 100% prosecution rate of anything that the country decides should be illegal, or is it more important that we have 100% freedom? Neither one is going to happen. So it's up to the voting electorate to basically say, where do we want to sort of draw the line, and then you regulate around that line.
Was your question whether or not what type of activities you can use Bitcoin for that's illegal, that should be stopped? Is that your question? Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I think the idea of getting rid of the currency altogether and changing it to Bitcoin is a good idea, because it's actually, this is digitized. It could be tracked. It could be monitored, with in a way that to avoid those kind of illegal activities. I'm not advocating that, but at least if that's what the government wants to do, that's a better way to do it. So you can buy a lot of illegal stuff with cash. You can buy a lot of illegal stuff with Bitcoin, and you can buy it, as I mentioned, with Amex prepaid cards. So is that really the way for us to fight crime? I know it's popular in the movies to say, follow the money, but is that the only way that for law enforcement to catch the crooks? As I mentioned earlier, it's better to step back and look at crime before it happens. I'm not talking about that movie Minority Report, but I'm talking about you can see other signs of potential terrorism activities, other signs of things that the law enforcement should be focused on, rather than just a financial angle.
Proper detective work instead of collecting it all, in other words.
Yeah, so, and by the way, Bitcoin is not just about currency. As I'm going to have a speech later this afternoon that talks about opportunities in Bitcoin, and there are so many other cool features built into the platform that you can utilize for ID verification, for escrow services, for a ton of other stuff that I think, just besides the currency aspect, if any one of those ideas are revolutionary. So Bitcoin is here to stay. There's a lot of potential behind it. There's millions of dollars in investments coming into it. I think we should find a way to use the good features of Bitcoin and not focus so much on the negative things that people do, because they do that with cash anyway. So you're not going to change people's behavior just because you change the method of currency.
Yeah. Just to be clear, Alan said escrow services, not escort services.
Yeah.
Stephanie,
Your mind is
in the gutter.
You know, there was a saying in the early days of the internet that the internet views censorship as damage and routes around it. And I think, at least on a technological perspective, Bitcoin is the same way. However, that didn't stop the government from coming in with PRISM and still looking at everybody's email. And same thing here. Governments can still go, depending on how hard they want to try, and shut down anything. In the early part of last century, they confiscated all the gold and made it illegal to own, and then put it in Fort Knox. I mean, a lot of people forget that. So, and in Thailand, just yesterday, they basically made it illegal to buy, sell, or even transfer person-to-person Bitcoins, because but that's also an area, that Ryan from Trade will be on the next panel. We'll probably talk about this a little bit more. We were chatting before the session. That's one of the most repressive places in the world in terms of microtransactions being illegal. And when you have a number of places that just basically the bank is the government, those are the ones that are going to be the most restrictive. And the least restrictive are going to be places like Kenya, where M-Pesa is flourishing.
we're almost out of time. Stephanie, you looked like you wanted to pipe in with a comment.
Yeah, just real quick. I think to your question, it's really important to draw a distinction between, identifying what the actual crime is and, potentially like other things that might be related to it, like a financial transaction. And to me, a crime is something that has a victim that harms somebody. So for instance, if somebody buys drugs with cash, or if somebody buys drugs on the Silk Road with Bitcoins or whatever, I don't see the crime that has been committed because I don't see a victim, And if it's, of course, it's just possession or personal use or whatever. Now, if it's human trafficking, yeah, that has a victim, and that would be the crime, the act of trafficking a human being and using them for whatever purpose, nefarious purposes, but not the moving money around in order to accomplish that. So I think we have to focus on what the actual crime is, and does it have a victim?
War on drugs is another example of government not doing it, getting it right. Because it's really, war on drugs is war on poor people and minorities. That's what's the outcome of war on drugs. So the PRISM thing that you mentioned is interesting, because we are spying on everybody in the world just to catch a very small percentage that are doing illegal activities. It's like the logic is really mind-blowing. Imagine if you had to go through a body search every time you went grocery shopping because they're shoplifters. I mean, you can't live like that. That's not the lifestyle that I didn't leave Iran to come here in order to be body searched when I go to grocery shopping, and in order to have my email spied on. So I think we need to draw those boundaries and not let the government go so far. I agree that we should try to find the actual people that get harmed by this and try to help them and avoid the crime, but the way to do it is not to spy on every human being on the planet. And
the philosopher in me wants to say, compared to what? So when we're looking at dollar-denominated crime, just look at what the Silk Road has done. So even in the worst-case scenario of buying drugs for personal consumption, we're seeing over $50 million in retail drug sales in the Silk Road over 2 years, and show me one case of violence that has happened. Now take dollar transactions and show me $50 million in retail drug transactions that occurred in dollars, and I guarantee you there are significantly more violence that has occurred than zero. So I'm not advocating crime being used with Bitcoin. I'm just saying that everything is relative to what it's replacing. And if you look at the use cases for Bitcoin, even in criminal acts, you're seeing significantly less violence in its use than it is with the current system that exists with the dollar.
I'm afraid we got to wrap it up, but this has been an awesome panel. I would love to continue this discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to this portion of our special Let's Talk Bitcoin conference coverage. Big thanks to Media Bistro for putting on a wonderful event at Inside Bitcoins. Stay tuned for more to come over the course of August. If you have any questions or comments for me directly, you can email adam@letstalkbitcoin.com. If you have questions, comments, or topic suggestions directed at the show broadly, please visit letstalkbitcoin.com/Reddit. Thanks for listening.